Have you ever witnessed a situation where someone who works behind the scenes is treated unfairly, but the person they serve steps in to make things right? Imagine this: Lee Min-ho, the famous actor, enjoying a peaceful meal at a high-end restaurant with his security guard quietly waiting at the door. It's a typical day for the two of them, but little did they know that the evening was about to take an unexpected turn. The restaurant was bustling with chatter as guests dined in luxury, enjoying their gourmet meals and sipping fine wine. The air was filled with the hum of conversation and the clinking of silverware. Lee Min-ho, as always, was discreet, enjoying his meal in the company of close friends. His security guard, a quiet and loyal man who had been with him for years, stood near the entrance, watching over the restaurant with the same dedication he brought to his job every day. It was a routine evening, but the atmosphere shifted when a group of well-dressed patrons walked in. One of them, a man who appeared to be in his late 40s, looked over at the security guard and scoffed. "What's this?" he muttered loudly, as if speaking to no one in particular. "A bodyguard at a fancy restaurant? How ridiculous." The words were sharp, clearly meant to humiliate the guard, but the man continued. "Just because you wear a suit and stand there doesn't mean you belong. Go back to your corner and let the real guests enjoy their meal." The comments were loud enough for several tables to overhear, and the discomfort in the air was palpable. The security guard, accustomed to being in the background, simply stood still, trying to ignore the mocking words. He wasn't the kind of person to retaliate, and he certainly didn't expect anything from the patrons. He knew his role: protecting Lee Min-ho was his job, and he did it well. But as the man's words continued, the atmosphere became more tense. What would happen next? Would the security guard continue to ignore the insults, or would someone step in and defend him? The tension in the room grew, and that's when Lee Min-ho, ever aware of his surroundings, noticed the scene unfolding. Lee Min-ho, sitting across the table with his friends, had initially been unaware of the unfolding drama. However, his sharp sense of awareness kicked in as he noticed a slight change in the body language of his security guard. The guard, who had always been calm and composed, appeared a little tense, his usual steady posture now stiff and uncomfortable. Glancing over, Lee Min-ho immediately understood what was happening. The actor's eyes narrowed as he watched the man at the other table continue to mock his security guard. The laughter of the patrons filled the room, but for Lee Min-ho, it was as if the world had quieted down. The hurtful words were unmistakable, and he knew that something needed to be done. His friends, aware of Lee Min-ho's reputation for kindness and humility, noticed the change in his demeanor. They too glanced at the scene, but unlike others, they knew Lee Min-ho wouldn't sit idly by. The actor didn't have to be a loud presence to make a statement. He had always believed in leading by example, and now, it was time for him to show the true strength of his character. Without hesitation, Lee Min-ho stood up from the table. His friends looked at him, momentarily surprised by his decision, but they knew there was no stopping him when he made up his mind. The actor moved gracefully across the restaurant, his presence commanding attention as he approached the table where the disrespectful man sat. "Excuse me," Lee Min-ho said, his voice calm but firm. The room grew quiet, all eyes now on the exchange taking place. The man who had been mocking the security guard looked up, a smug smile still on his face, not recognizing the actor right away. "I couldn't help but overhear your comments," Lee Min-ho continued, his gaze unwavering. "And I wanted to let you know that your words are completely out of line. Everyone here, regardless of their role, deserves respect. Especially someone who is doing their job and doing it well." The smug expression on the man's face faltered for a moment, but he quickly regained his composure. "And who are you to tell me how to behave?" he sneered, clearly annoyed by the interruption. Lee Min-ho's eyes never left his. "I'm someone who values dignity. And the man you're insulting happens to be my security guard, someone who has worked tirelessly for me for years. I won't stand by and let anyone disrespect him." The actor's words were measured, but there was an undeniable strength in them. He wasn't being aggressive or confrontational, but the sincerity in his voice was clear. The other diners were now watching closely, sensing the tension in the air. The man, realizing who Lee Min-ho was, suddenly looked uncomfortable. His attitude shifted, but instead of offering an apology, he simply muttered, "I didn't know." Lee Min-ho shook his head. "It shouldn't matter who he is or who I am. We all deserve respect, no matter our position. Please remember that next time. With those final words, Lee Min-ho turned to walk back toward his table, leaving the man stunned and speechless. The room was still, the patrons unsure of how to react. But Lee Min-ho had made his point without raising his voice or making a scene. He had simply stood up for what was right. As he returned to his table, his security guard stood a little taller. The respect in Lee Min-ho's actions was clear, and the guard couldn't help but feel a surge of gratitude. It wasn't just about defending him in that moment, it was about showing the world that kindness and dignity mattered more than anything else. Lee Min-ho sat down, his calm demeanor returning as if nothing had happened. His friends, though, were visibly impressed. "That was incredible," one of them remarked. "You didn't just defend him, you made everyone around you think twice about how they treat others." Lee Min-ho smiled softly. "It's just the right thing to do." But as the dinner continued, the question remained, what impact would this act of kindness have on the other diners? Would they follow Lee Min-ho's example and treat those around them with more respect, or would they return to their old ways? As the evening continued, the tension in the restaurant slowly began to dissipate. The guests, who had been watching the exchange between Lee Min-ho and the man at the table, seemed to return to their meals, but the atmosphere had shifted. There was a newfound sense of quiet reflection among the patrons, and even the staff seemed to be acting a little more mindful. The group of friends that Lee Min-ho was dining with were still in awe of how gracefully he handled the situation. They knew that the actor had the power to make a scene, but he had chosen to address the issue calmly and with dignity. It wasn't about showing his celebrity status, it was about standing up for the values he believed in, no matter where he was or who he was with. "I've seen you handle tense situations before, but that was something else," one of his friends said, breaking the silence. "You didn't just shut the guy down. You made him realize that his behavior wasn't acceptable, and you did it with such class. I don't think anyone would have expected that." Lee Min-ho smiled faintly, his eyes scanning the room. It wasn't about proving a point. It was about doing what's right. People sometimes forget that the way we treat others matters. It doesn't matter if they're a celebrity, a security guard, or anyone else. Respect should always be the standard. His words lingered in the air, resonating with the people around him. And as the night continued, there were subtle shifts in how people interacted with one another. The servers, who had witnessed the entire exchange, seemed more attentive and kind, going out of their way to ensure every guest was taken care of. The guests, too, appeared more considerate, perhaps questioning their own behaviors and assumptions. For Lee Min-ho, though, this wasn't about seeking validation for his actions. He didn't need praise for doing what felt like the right thing. He believed that this small moment of standing up for his security guard could be a catalyst for a broader change if people began to consider their actions in everyday situations and treat others with more empathy and respect. As the meal came to an end, Lee Min-ho's security guard approached him. There was a quiet gratitude in his eyes, a subtle nod of appreciation that said more than words could express. "Thank you," he said quietly, his voice low but filled with emotion. "You didn't have to do that, but you did." Lee Min-ho turned to him with a soft smile. "You're not just a guard to me. You're a friend, and I would never let anyone treat you with disrespect. You've been by my side for years. You deserve the same respect as anyone else." The guard nodded, visibly moved by the actor's words. It wasn't just the action that meant something to him, it was the deeper understanding that Lee Min-ho saw him as an equal, as someone deserving of dignity, no matter his position or job. As they walked out of the restaurant, Lee Min-ho couldn't help but feel that the evening had been a reminder of something important. In the rush of celebrity, fame, and wealth, it was easy for people to lose sight of the values that truly mattered. But the simple act of standing up for someone who had been humiliated wasn't about his status or image, it was about demonstrating to the world that treating others with kindness was more important than any accolade or recognition. Lee Min-ho glanced over at his security guard, now walking beside him with a newfound sense of pride. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "sometimes it's the quiet, unnoticed moments that have the most power. When you stand up for someone who's been overlooked, it can spark something bigger. Maybe that's what we need more of in this world, small, quiet acts of kindness that make a real difference." The security guard smiled, understanding exactly what Lee Min-ho meant. The lesson wasn't just in the confrontation with the man at the restaurant, it was in the ripple effect that it created. Perhaps, in time, others would begin to realize that respect wasn't something that should be given selectively, it was something that should be shared with everyone. But as they reached the car, Lee Min-ho's thoughts lingered on something else. The real challenge wasn't just standing up for someone in a moment of humiliation, it was how people acted when no one was watching. It was about consistently showing respect and kindness, even when it wasn't demanded or expected. As the car door closed and they drove off into the night, the actor couldn't shake the feeling that, in some small way, he had helped shift the atmosphere in that restaurant. And perhaps, in turn, that small ripple of change would inspire others to follow suit. As the car made its way through the quiet streets, Lee Min-ho found himself deep in thought. The conversation earlier, the look of gratitude in his security guard's eyes, and the subtle shift in the atmosphere at the restaurant all stayed with him. The more he reflected, the more he realized that this was bigger than just one act of kindness. It was about setting an example, a reminder that the way people treat others truly matters, especially in a world where it's easy to overlook those who serve us behind the scenes. Over the next few days, the story of Lee Min-ho's stand against the disrespect his security guard had faced spread quietly among those who had witnessed it, and even among some who hadn't. News outlets didn't pick up on it because of a scandal, but because of the deeper message it conveyed. It wasn't the usual celebrity drama, it was an ordinary moment that reflected extraordinary values. People began to talk about it in a way that left them reflecting on their own behavior and how they treated others. Lee Min-ho received messages from fans all over the world, thanking him for his actions and sharing how his gesture had inspired them. Some even shared personal stories about how they'd experienced similar situations and how they wished someone had stood up for them. Others began to share how they had started standing up for their own colleagues or friends, inspired by the actor's example. One particular message stood out. A young woman wrote, "I work as a cashier in a busy store, and often, customers treat me as though I'm invisible, just like I don't matter. But after hearing what you did, I started speaking up for myself when people were rude. It felt so empowering. Thank you for showing me that my voice matters." Lee Min-ho felt a deep sense of satisfaction when he read these messages. They weren't about his fame or his public image. They were about real, meaningful connections. His actions, however small they may have seemed at the time, had sparked something much larger. It wasn't just about helping one individual, it was about helping people see the importance of treating everyone with dignity, no matter their background or role. Despite the positive messages pouring in, Lee Min-ho remained humble. For him, the true reward wasn't in the public attention but in the quiet moments, the moments when he could make a positive difference in someone's life, even if it wasn't immediately recognized. He understood that sometimes, it was the unseen actions that carried the most weight. The story of that night at the restaurant became a turning point in his life. He realized that his position in the public eye gave him the unique opportunity to not only entertain but also to influence, to use his voice for something greater than himself. He didn't want to be remembered for just his roles on screen but for the way he treated people in real life, the small gestures, the moments of understanding, and the quiet acts of kindness that could create a ripple effect of change. As the days passed, Lee Min-ho's security guard began to notice a change in his own outlook as well. He had always been the kind of person to keep to himself, doing his job quietly without seeking any recognition. But since the incident at the restaurant, he found himself walking with a little more confidence, feeling a renewed sense of pride in what he did. It wasn't about the job itself, it was about the respect that came with it, the validation that what he did truly mattered. One evening, as they sat together for a brief moment of rest, the security guard spoke up. "You know, after that night, things have felt different. Not just with the people around me, but within myself. It's as if I'd gained a new sense of value, a new understanding of what respect really means. I've realized that I shouldn't just accept being treated poorly, I should stand up for myself too." Lee Min-ho looked at him, nodding thoughtfully. "That's exactly it. It's about knowing your worth and not letting anyone make you feel small. We all deserve to be treated with dignity, no matter where we are or what we do." The security guard smiled, his eyes filled with gratitude. "And that's something I'll never forget. Thank you for not just standing up for me, but for teaching me that I can stand up for myself." For Lee Min-ho, the impact of that moment was profound. Not only had he defended his security guard in front of a crowd, but he had helped him recognize his own value. It was one of those rare moments in life where something small could lead to something much bigger, a personal transformation, both for him and for the people around him. As he looked out of the car window, the city lights blurring past him, Lee Min-ho felt a sense of peace. He had learned an important lesson that every action, no matter how small, can have far-reaching consequences. The world may seem large, but sometimes, it's the smallest moments that make the biggest difference. As time passed, the ripple effect of Lee Min-ho's actions continued to unfold, spreading beyond the restaurant and the people directly involved. The story of the incident, though not widely covered in the press, found its way into everyday conversations and social media platforms. People who had heard about the incident began to reflect on their own behavior and the way they treated those around them. Lee Min-ho's simple yet powerful stance had struck a chord, encouraging others to speak up against injustice and, more importantly, to show kindness in their daily lives. A few weeks later, Lee Min-ho received an invitation to speak at a charity event, one that focused on promoting kindness, equality, and respect in society. The organization recognized him not only for his fame but for his actions that had inspired so many people to re-evaluate how they treated others. At the event, Lee Min-ho stood before an audience of hundreds, his security guard standing quietly in the background, a proud but humble presence. When it was his turn to speak, Lee Min-ho didn't focus on his career or achievements. Instead, he began by recalling the incident at the restaurant. Sometimes, in life, we're faced with moments that challenge our values. We don't always have control over how others act, but we do have control over how we respond. That night, I made a choice not to get involved in a confrontation but to stand up for what I believe is right, respect for every person, no matter their role in society. And I want to remind everyone here that our words and actions carry weight. How we treat others, especially those who are often unseen, says a lot about who we are as individuals. His words resonated deeply with the audience, many of whom had been inspired by his actions. The event wasn't just a celebration of Lee Min-ho's stardom, it was a celebration of the values he embodied and the impact he had on those around him. Backstage, Lee Min-ho's security guard approached him after the speech, visibly moved by his words. "You've done something incredible," he said, a smile spreading across his face. "You've shown that kindness isn't just a one-time act, it's a way of living. You've made me feel like I matter in ways I didn't even realize." Lee Min-ho placed a reassuring hand on his friend's shoulder. "You've always mattered," he said, "and I'm glad you see that now. It's not about making a big statement. It's about showing respect every day, in every small action." As the evening continued, the conversation among those present shifted. People began discussing how they could implement similar acts of kindness in their own lives. Some shared stories of how they had stood up for colleagues who had been overlooked, while others talked about being more mindful of how they interacted with people in the service industry, the unsung heroes who often go unnoticed in the hustle of everyday life. For Lee Min-ho, this moment marked a deeper understanding of the power of influence. It wasn't just about using his fame to draw attention, it was about using his platform to change minds and spark conversations. The actor had always known that he could impact people through his roles on screen, but now, he realized that his influence extended beyond his films. It was about leading by example, being someone who could inspire others to do better, be better, and treat everyone with the respect they deserved. As the night came to a close, Lee Min-ho and his security guard walked out of the event together. The guard, who had been standing silently in the background for so many years, now walked with a newfound sense of pride. It wasn't just the recognition from the public that mattered, it was the way he had learned to value himself, to understand that his worth was not defined by his job, but by the respect he commanded through his actions and character. "You know," the security guard said as they left the event, "I've learned more from this experience than I ever could have imagined. I've learned that my voice matters, that standing up for others isn't just for heroes, it's for anyone who chooses to do the right thing." Lee Min-ho smiled warmly, the quiet strength of his friend now mirrored in the way he carried himself. "That's exactly it. We all have the power to make a difference, no matter our role in life. It's not about being in the spotlight, it's about making the world better in whatever way we can." As they got into the car, Lee Min-ho felt a deep sense of fulfillment. It wasn't about what he had achieved, it was about what he had helped others achieve. That night, at the restaurant, had been a catalyst for something bigger than he could have imagined. It was about more than just defending his security guard, it was about inspiring everyone around him to treat others with dignity and respect. For Lee Min-ho, the true reward wasn't in the recognition or the accolades, it was in the knowledge that his small act of kindness had created a ripple effect, encouraging others to do the same. As the car drove through the bustling city streets, Lee Min-ho reflected on the journey that had started with one simple act of standing up for his security guard. What had initially been a quiet, personal moment of integrity had grown into something much more, an inspiring movement that touched many people, leading them to reconsider how they interacted with others. He had always believed in the power of respect, but now he saw firsthand how even the smallest gestures could leave a lasting impact. The following weeks were filled with conversations, both public and private, that further confirmed how much his actions had resonated. People were still talking about what happened at the restaurant, but now the story had evolved into something more significant. It was no longer just about Lee Min-ho defending his friend, it had become a reminder to people everywhere that kindness and respect should be at the core of human interaction. At a charity event a few weeks later, Lee Min-ho was approached by a group of young students. They had heard about the incident and were eager to tell him how it had changed their perspective. One of them, a girl in her late teens, said, "I've always been afraid to speak up when I see someone being treated unfairly. But after hearing about what you did, I realized that I don't need to be afraid. I can stand up for people, too." Lee Min-ho was taken aback by her words, his heart swelling with pride. "You already have the strength within you," he said. "It's all about having the courage to do what's right, even when it seems difficult. You don't have to be famous to make a difference, your actions matter, no matter how big or small." His words weren't just aimed at these students, they were a reminder to everyone who heard them. No matter who you are, your actions have the potential to inspire others and create a ripple effect of kindness, understanding, and change. It wasn't just about doing the right thing when others were watching, it was about living with integrity every day, in every small interaction. But the true impact of Lee Min-ho's actions wasn't just about inspiring individuals. It was about fostering a sense of community and compassion. Over the weeks, he started to see more and more examples of kindness being shared among people. Strangers would offer help to those in need, colleagues would stand up for each other when they saw unfair treatment, and friends would remind one another to show appreciation for the small things. It became evident that the ripple effect had extended far beyond his immediate circle. The small act of standing up for a friend had sparked a movement, one that encouraged people to look at the world with more empathy. And for Lee Min-ho, this was the true measure of success, not the fame or the fortune, but the lasting effect he had on the world around him. As Lee Min-ho looked out of the car window, watching the city lights pass by, he realized that this had been more than just an event, it had been a turning point in his life. His perspective had shifted, and he felt more connected to the people around him than ever before. He wasn't just an actor, he was someone who could use his voice to make a real difference. And the most meaningful change, he realized, wasn't the applause or the recognition, it was knowing that his actions had contributed to making the world just a little bit kinder. With a soft smile, he turned to his security guard, who was sitting beside him. "Thank you for being a part of this," he said. "You've shown me that the quiet acts of courage are often the most powerful." The security guard nodded, his face filled with gratitude. "No, thank you. You showed me that everyone deserves to be respected, no matter their job or status." As the car rolled to a stop, Lee Min-ho reflected on the journey that had unfolded since that night at the restaurant. What began as a simple act of standing up for his friend had become a powerful reminder to everyone about the importance of kindness, empathy, and respect. In the end, it wasn't about the fame or the attention, it was about how one small action could lead to a shift in how people interacted with one another. Lee Min-ho had always known the value of kindness, but now he knew how much one person's decision could inspire others to live with greater empathy. As they stepped out of the car, Lee Min-ho made a silent promise to continue spreading that message, to keep using his voice for good. And so, if you've made it this far, type kindness in the comments. Let's all carry the message forward, treating others with respect, dignity, and understanding, because we all have the power to make a difference.